Now, David, like all our guests on Build Hatch, we always like to take it back to the beginning, and I'm really excited. You're obviously the New South Wales Building Commissioner, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. So, like I said, I'll take it back to the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in New Guinea, and so my parents, I was born in Madang in 1950, so that's a while back, and my father was in aviation, and I came back to Australia when I was 2, but when I was 10, my parents went back to New Guinea, so I really then grew up from 10 to my end of my teens in New Guinea, and we lived in Port Moresby. And it was a bit like living in a boys' annual, because the Kokoda Trail was at my doorstep, and my best mate lived in Kokoda, and my father ran the national airline, and I spent every weekend in an aeroplane going somewhere, pulling back bags of mud crabs and goodness knows what. It was just like a boys' annual. So
That's a fascinating childhood.
yeah, no, it was great, and I guess it prepared me in many ways for. And when you talk about kids today, and you worry about the things they might get up to, well, when I used to come home and tell my mother some of the things I did when I wasn't on the end of the bloody tether, was that, and she'd look at me and she'd say, "You were joking, you didn't do that." I mean, I went down rivers past crocodiles and typhons and all sorts of stuff, and she said, "I'd rather probably not know as much as you're telling me." But so my parents got divorced when I was about 13, and so I was sent off to boarding school. So I went to boarding school in Sydney, and had a mixed life of city life for part of the year, and home to New Guinea 4 times a year, which was just amazing. And I spent most of my time in Kokoda with my best mate, and the stuff we got up to, they had a cattle farm, and they had gold mines, and they had rubber, and we spent a lot of time floating up and down rivers and walking into the Kokoda Trail, and yeah, so it was pretty special. But it taught you some resilience. It taught you probably to be a bit bolder than you should have been. You always think you're bulletproof when you're that age, but we got away with being bulletproof. But,
So what was that like? Like, I guess going backwards and forwards and having that real sort of practical lifestyle, and then coming back to the city for school?
oh, boarding school's a hard life. Back in the 60s, the days of boarding school was pretty rugged. Big dormitories, cold, cranky housemasters, getting slashes across the tail with a cane.
Good discipline.
Well, you couldn't do that today. So I went to bed many a night with 6 of the best across the tail, and I guess in a way that toughened you up a bit as well. So no, look, boarding school, I love boarding school, because you sort of have 300 mates on tap 24/7, and you won't have a game of rugby at any time. You've got an automatic team, and you're into it. So we did all sorts of things, and again, some of the stuff that we did and went back and told our parents about, they weren't overly amused by that, but that was life. So that really set it up, and it was a Kristian grammar school that I went to, and I guess in Port Moresby, where I grew up, it was a very religious town in those days. So you grew up very much. I was an altar boy in Port Moresby when I was in primary school, and so you become pretty engaged with church life, because it's part of the community in places like New Guinea at the time. Very strong mission outlook, and so I carried that into the boarding school that I was at, because it was a Kristian boarding school. And I got to the end of that, and my mother said to me, "Well, what are you going to do with yourself?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to be a priest." And she said, "Well, not until you've been around the world on your own, and I'll pay the ticket and give you some money, and because you're not going to make that decision without going and seeing the world and seeing what the alternative is." So unfortunately, it didn't get that far, because I ran into a couple of people that really set me on the construction career that I was at. So back in those days, people like Alan Kell, who was the founder of Kell and Rigby, and Lyle Giles, who was the founder of LW Giles at the time, and I went out to an orientation day just to hear a bit about this industry, and I was pretty well hooked from that moment, and I've been passionately engaged in this industry now for over 50 years, and been a fantastic trajectory.
Well, hell of an upbringing, and obviously having that, I guess, that practical, old school growing up lifestyle. I'd imagine looking back on it would be an amazing part of your life.
I guess the stage where your kids think, "Dad, do we have to hear that again?"
So you set on this path of trajectory in construction. Were you a practical person in construction, or like were you more management? What were you thinking sort of back then in construction?
Well, I started on the tools. I mean, while I was a cadet, I graduated from school and then I went to university straight from school. So AW Edwards in those days hadn't had such a thing as a cadet. They'd only ever had apprentices. So Mr. Edwards said to me, look, he said, I don't know anything about these university courses, mate. He said, so I'll let you start as a second year apprentice. So here's the kit of tools you do next Monday morning. So I spent 3 years doing a real apprenticeship on site in this joinery shop. It was I saw the whole gambit, right? So I've had a privileged introduction to the industry where I've pretty well done everything. I've mixed concrete, I've bored piles, I've fitted off joinery, I've welded, I've dogged a crane. There's not a job in the industry that I haven't done. And so what that did was give me an unbelievable insight into how to apply my skills in organising projects, managing the design of projects, managing the delivery of projects. So I started as an administrator with Concrete Constructions after I graduated, and I was with Concretes until the end of '88. So my journey there was administrator, project manager, associate director, and then director. I've worked across projects, Sydney Hilton, Key Apartments, big and small projects, and perhaps my skill set became recognised as being someone who can sort projects out when they're in the strife. So I became almost a bit like the Red Adair at Concrete Constructions. I got sent to clean up everybody else's mess. So and Sydney Hilton was 2 or 3 years into it, and it wasn't looking like it was going to be finished. And so I was sent down there to finish that off. So I did the last 2 years down there and brought the project home. And I've done probably many projects like that, but the trajectory that put me on was at 34 years of age, they threw me the keys and said, mate, go down and finish Parliament House in Canberra. So I went down as a construction director at Parliament House at 34 years of age and had to bring that home. And so it was a $1 billion project. So it was a pretty extraordinary opportunity to have that. But the thing that always stood me in good stead was that I just had such a knowledge of how to make buildings and how materials go together and how to talk to tradespeople and work with them. It's been a really easy journey to do that, because when you can actually talk the talk and help people walk the walk, it's a joy to be in this industry.
You mentioned a couple of things there about you had that early on practical experience. One of the observations that I find problematic in the industry is a lot of people, when they go down the construction management path of university life, the first job they get thrown into or is commonly advertised for is a contract administrator. Whereas I find like it just seems a little bit backward that you go into that role where you miss out on so many practical levels of the business, the foreman with the day-to-day sort of stuff.
Well, you do miss out on that, and when I did my building degree, it was at New South Wales University, in those days known as Kenzo Tech. But so it sort of still had that blend of lecturers that were ex-practitioners from the industry. So you really got taught by people who'd built stuff, and whereas if you went back these days, you'd probably be taught by people who'd never built anything. And so look, I think one of the big mistakes that our industry and government made about the early 80s was to make a university career the only worthwhile career to go after. We actually devalued a vocational career. We devalued TAFE and said, if we're going to be the clever country, we need people who go through universities. Now, we did that for 20 years before we worked out wrong answer.
Well said.
So look, what we did then was we created a cohort of people that they were envelope lickers as far as I'm concerned. So they were powder puff builders, and we used to joke at times at Concretes, and we wanted to get a new project manager coming in, and we wanted to get people who were really practical and knew how to build buildings. And And in interviews, we'd form a view as, is that person who sprayed dust on their shoes before they came in, was that real or was it a spray can? So we never had much time for people who didn't know much about building. So yeah, look, I think it's an unfortunate thing, and we're paying a high price because on the jobs that I've been going to as building commissioner over the last 3 years now, is that I'm finding construction management graduates, I'd say 60% of the people that have graduated were in it just to get a piece of paper, just to get a job, a well-paid job as an administrator or a assistant project manager or something, and they jumped that critical learning phase, and that's showing up in the buildings that I'm seeing, where these people just don't understand how you put formwork together, how you pour concrete properly, how you lay bricks, how you put tiles on walls, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And so we've got to go back and seed those people with the insights they need to have if we're going to build good buildings. So we've had 30 years now of graduating people that we had on bad trajectories. In Europe, if you want to be an architect or an engineer, you generally would start your career as a tradesperson, and you'd do 2 or 3 years on the tools, and then you'd have a really good understanding of when you put a line on a piece of paper for a wall and you wanted to make it out of bricks or you want to make it out of timber or whatever, you'd have a pretty good idea how that stuff went together. We've got people who are putting lines on a piece of paper. In fact, what's another problem that we've developed is that you also had to have a good capability in drawing, manual drawing. And of course now everything's done on a computer, and I flip a pen to a few people on sites these days and say, draw me a section of what that looks like if I open it up. And you can see them wither in front of you because, and I remember down at Wollongong, I gave a young bloke a pencil and a piece of paper and I said, that expansion joint, do you know what's in there? And he said, oh no, he said, we subcontracted that out to for the rest of your life as well. So I have a zero tolerance of unsafe work practices, and I just think some of these young people are not taught about embedded safety. It's got to be a life. Your lifestyle's got to be about how safe is this job? Is everybody going to get home every night? So I go into these jobs where people give me a safety induction and I say, well, that's fantastic. Did you go around the job this morning before you put the key in the gate and let everybody in because you're the safety officer? Are you certain there are no hazards on this job? Oh, pretty good, mate. Yeah, it'll all be pretty right. So by the time I've left and I've got a list of things that are wrong, and I get right into these blokes and say, you've got no idea, mate, you're out to lunch. And if I come back again and find it like this, I'll shut you down. Because safety's number one. And of course the other thing that we've done is that it's an industry that didn't think there were any women in it anymore. Didn't think there were many women in it at all, and that there weren't going to be. And I'm finding the most atrocious site amenities that are not fit for a third world country, so let alone for males, but absolutely not suitable for females. And so you'll see that some of my posts, I actually photograph the toilets and I put it out there. And these guys are saying, Commissioner, don't post that. That's terrible. I'm saying, but that's what you've got your workforce.
That's a valid point.
Using. So, so there's a strong correlation on if you've got an unsafe site and you've got a site with lousy amenities, you are most likely 100% to have a lot of non-compliant construction because you're just simply not thinking about it.
What about, like, everything you've said is so true. What about someone listening to this who's running a smaller business, who doesn't have the sophisticated systems in place yet, who doesn't have that money behind them, who's, say, a residential builder who wants to step it up with the big guys and girls, to put it lightly? What do you do? How do you juggle that sort of pressure and that tension of getting to that step?
Well, we discussed earlier that anyone who thinks this industry, that the entry point now can be a $2 company, a ute and a mobile phone, they're over. I mean, we're building serious assets that people invest their life savings in. They're emotionally invested, they're economically invested. So you've got a duty of care if you're going to be a player in this industry to make sure that you don't put consumers in harm's way. So if you think this is all about you, then you're entering the industry for the wrong reason, because this industry is all about the consumers and getting it right and getting your customers to come back. I mean, I had a wonderful privilege of spending time with A.V. Jennings, the founder of AVJ, and he said, David, 80% of our customers are repeat. If they're not someone coming back and buying their second or third home, they're trading up or they're trading down, they're bringing their kids in to say, you buy a house off Mr. Jennings. And he said, I value my brand so much. Now, I started building a couple of cottages at a time, and I always made a commitment that if I was going to build cottages of more than that scale, they were going to be good cottages. Now, he grew a business that was doing 20,000 cottages a year at one stage, and he still had that ethic running right through the business, was that he stood behind every single house. So if you're going to start up today, I think that you're going to have to recognise the fact that you probably need to have the right capital. You need to have some people. A single director of a company is simply not a good way to do your business. You should have a couple of non-executive directors who they don't need to work in the business or be full-time, but you need people who can say, I wouldn't do that. Or someone you go back and say, hey, I'm thinking about doubling the size of the business. They'll have a look at you and say, well, mate, you're a bit short on an administrator, or you didn't make a profit on that last job. So you don't make a profit doubling your business. The first thing you do is make a profit on what you're doing now, and then you double your business. So I think if I was starting out or advising someone to start out, I'd say, make sure that you've got a company structure that might have a couple of people on the board that might be prepared to tell you no when no was necessary. Make sure that you've got enough capital to do the sorts of work that you're undertaking, because it's not a dress rehearsal. I mean, this ain't a dress rehearsal, this business. If you go belly up and you've got 10 uncompleted homes, you're potentially going to destroy 10 families.
That's right, big ramifications.
Totally. So you've got a duty of care to get it right.
Absolutely. Now, I said earlier, I'm an astute company now. It's lovely to have you on the show, and you've actually been awarded the Australian stuff.
Or an Order of Australia medal.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So Chief, you've been awarded the Order of Australia medal. Can you tell our listeners how that came about? It's one hell of an achievement. So how were you awarded that medal?
Well, it sort of came not long after we finished Parliament House. I mean, when I say we, there were 3,000 people on the job site. So I always take a view that no one ever did anything on their own. I mean, I had 3,000 people there with 100% committed to making sure that job was finished on time, and it was the best quality job that was ever built for mankind. And so during that job, we were able to really engage the community, and we used things like open days and all sorts of other opportunities to do some significant fundraising. Our fund partner was Rotary, and the program that they had was to eliminate malaria and then to eliminate polio. And so we had a purpose. It was, we said, well, everything we do here that has got the opportunity to drag a few dollars in the door, let's make sure that we tip the dollars into these sorts of things. And so I've always been pretty community minded. I've always felt that, I've spent about 30% of my hours away from home through my life of basically doing voluntary work. And I was chairman of Central Coast Area Health, and you end up really spending a lot of time on industry associations and advising education boards and all those sorts of things. So I think that the recognition was for the contribution to the community and the industry, and so I'm proud to have had that recognition. But I make it pretty clear every time that that gets raised is that there's a cast of thousands that really helped make that happen.
Well, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about being recognised by your peers and your country of the contribution that you make to your industry and community, like you said very well before. Now, besides straight shooting and being active out there in the industry, what does the Commissioner like to do when he's not busy with work?
Well, these days there's not much time outside work. I have to tell you that I hit the decks here at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I don't leave here till 6:30 at night, and I generally have a swag of stuff to take home on weekends. And I haven't hit a golf ball since I've been Commissioner. Well, that's not quite right. I've had two or three rounds of golf since I was Commissioner, but I find that if you don't hit the ball often, you hit the ball badly, or you don't hit it at all. So I don't enjoy that, so my handicap is an undescribable number at the moment. So I hope one day that I can put that back together again. I'd like to have a crack at sort of getting back to the mid-teens at least, and enjoy golf, because I think batting off 30 is not much fun. So I think you need to have at least half that, and that saves a lot of balls as well. So I do a bit of golf. I really enjoy cooking, so I do a fair bit of cooking when there's an opportunity. So I generally do most of the major events that around my family's home, and so cooking's a big experience. I have been heavily involved in the wine industry over the years. I did own a small vineyard up in the Hunter there at Kelman, so I had a share in the Kelman estate. So I think I did 5 or 6 vintages up there, and went through growing the grapes and getting the grapes made, and then trying to market the stuff. And it's funny, isn't it, when you start a new vineyard off that's very, very young and it doesn't really make great grapes. And I dragged one of my mates up on the early vintages and said to him, hey, what do you think of this? And he said, oh, it's just remarkable. He said, this is just remarkable. And I said, what's so remarkable? He said, hey, you got the horse to stand over the bottle. So a bit of wine. I had a pretty good collection at one stage, and but my real joy is beach fishing and estuary fishing. I don't really care for the ocean that much, but my father and my grandfather were fishermen of extraordinary capability, and I've just had the joy of just spending plenty of time watching that line drift in the water and letting your mind just float along with it. And every now and again you drag a fish in, and I've got a young grandson who's as enthusiastic as I am about it, so he keeps banging me on the shoulder saying, Pop, when are we going fishing again? When are we going fishing again? So all of those things are on my agenda. I've got 6 grandkids now, so that's a joy, a real privilege, and so I've got plenty to do. So we'll get this job done in the next year, and there's plenty of stuff to do.
Look, well said, and I can't help but ask and be curious to know what's sort of what are some of the trends that you're seeing, or like if you put together a bit of a list to put it in that context of what are some of the what's the biggest change you would like to see in the industry moving forward before you finish your role?
Well, I'm sure I'll always have some engagement with work. I'm not going to sort of stop work. It's just that I'm going to make more time for some of the things that I'd like to do. But and I've been married 50 years this year, so I've got a wife who's pretty invested in the pain and suffering caused by a cranky old bloody building commissioner coming home. So I've got a bit of the effort to put back there. But look, this industry is now 20 years into the 21st century, and we're really just discovering that. We're still using building contracts that were written in the twilight of the last century. Those contracts were written with the sorts of attitudes that people who used to bully their supply chain and pass risk down the supply chain, they institutionalised that. Now we're 20 years past when that should have been taken out the back and shot. We're so far into this century that technology would allow us now to enable that direct payments went straight from the customer to the supply chain. Why should they have a holiday at the builder's bank account on the way out to the supply chain? So I'm working on a project at the moment. We're doing this remediation of the cladding in New South Wales, and because I'm the boss, I'm able to sort of put a few rules in, and one of them is that we're setting up the contract such that that the clients will directly pay any subcontractor on any of the jobs who's got a contract value of $50,000 or more. They'll get directly paid at the same time as what's left for the builder gets paid. I have a low tolerance of people grabbing hold of stuff that other people have earned the value from, and so I think we're going to see a rapid transition of that. I think these trust accounts and all that sort of stuff, why would you need a trust account if you just said to the client, here's all the people that made up my progress payment, 80% of my progress payment's all these people, I authorise you to pay them directly. Well, how hard's that? So I think we're going to see that sort of shift. I think we've still got twilight issues from the last century dictating people who still want to hold on to those old ways of doing things. I think that we've seen an explosion in wages cost in the industry. I have some views about what's causing that, but it's pointless to unpack that now. But you know, on a job site these days, at $100 an hour to $120 an hour, that'd be pretty well what your all-up cost for labour is. And only a matter of 5 or 7 years ago, it was $80 an hour. That's got to tell you now that you've got to start to move that workforce off the site and start to bring stuff to the site. So I reckon that probably by 2025, you'll only, you know, what we do on the job site today, at least 50% of that effort will have moved off-site. And why not? Because why shouldn't the windows fit the opening when they get there? Why should you have to cut the windows to suit the opening? So I think we're going to see more and more off-site. We also need to realise that we live in a global ecosystem in construction where the global construction turnover is about 12 trillion US dollars a year. So that's how big it is. And in Australia, we represent about 2% of that. So we are an absolute speck on the tail of the global construction elephant. And we tend to think that we live in an island, but the bottom line is about 60% of everything we put in a building these days comes from the global marketplace. Doesn't matter, aluminium, glass, sprinkler heads, light fittings, you name it, reinforcement, the cement, you know, 60% I think these days comes from markets that are beyond just simply our own. And so we've got to start to develop procurement and quality control systems that allow you to have a line of sight to the beginning of materials, where they come from, make sure that they're compliant, make sure that they are fit for purpose, and that we're not putting trash into buildings. So I think we will adapt to working better in a global supply chain than we have been. And I think that people are not conscious of just how smart buildings are getting. So buildings are getting smarter. There's more smartness going in buildings than people imagine, and that's happening every single day. I mean, I'm seeing precast panels now come embedded with receptors in them that can transmit the temperature of the precast panel to an independent monitoring source to say, is the panel performing? Is it wet? Is water going through the panel? So we're getting smartness embedded into it. I mean, today, you know, if you take cranes, I mean, just in 7 years, the transformation in cranes. I used to have a conversation with people back about 2012, 13, and I said, you know, I reckon we'll have electric cranes by 2022, and Oh, no, mate. Diesel cranes, they're around forever, mate, you know. No. Well, I reckon 80% of cranes these days are electric cranes. And the reason for that is that they're quieter. So, you know, we're building in urban areas and diesel cranes were really, really noisy. And so electric cranes are much more quiet. They're also environmentally friendlier because you can get your source from a green power supply. But more importantly, an electric crane allows you to have on board a whole bunch of sensory capabilities that were never there in the old clunky diesel cranes. And so you know, there's now people who sell cranes and they offer a global, around-the-clock observation of those cranes. So all the diagnostics are being sucked up from all of these cranes around the world, and they'll monitor, did the driver do an overlift today? Goes straight to the data center, say that driver's constantly doing an overlift. Or there's now technology available that if there's a particular lift that you need to do that's a bit complicated, some cranes now will offer you a hologram that sits beside and says this is how you do this.
Oh, it shows you how to do it.
Shows you how to do it.
Wow.
And so you know, cranes in the Middle East and other places, these global companies provide global service. So they'll send you a message and say, your crane's got to be down for 2 hours next week. We've got the global service team coming in to service it. So plan to have 2 hours downtime next week. Our team will fly in, service your crane and leave. Now that's just automatic because the insurers want you to have a crane that is fit for purpose, it's operating, it's having safety observances. Same thing's happening with lifts. If you go out and have a look at Coney's data centre out there at South Sydney, they offer 24/7 lift car support. You know, the days of waiting for a technician to turn up and talk to you and say, hey, we're on the way. You just press a button now and you're immediately talking to someone who knows exactly. They'll say, oh, you're in lift car number 2 and you're caught between the 10th and the 11th floor. Don't do anything, we're on the way. And or we're now going to try and, so everybody stands still, we're going to try and reset the controller so that in fact that fault, because most computers, you know, if you turn them off and turn them on, they tend to work. So they give that a go as well. But they're able to do it in a way where the passengers sort of know what's happening and no one's real shocked about it. So buildings are getting smarter and COVID's actually is driving that now. So if, for example, you follow the delivery of health services during COVID, a lot of the hospitals now have treated hospital in a home using technology where the district nurse can take the apparatus around and actually plug it into the internet in your home, do the scan, actually have the camera on you like you've got here now, and the specialist can have a look at you and say, yeah, but no, give him a pill or bring him in, right? So we're going to see more on that, and as you and I get older, these things are going to allow us to live in our homes safely because we're going to have a smart house around us. You know, it's going to tell us what day of the week it is, and it's going to tell us if it's raining outside, and so it's very exciting times. And so I had a bunch of young professionals in here, graduate certifiers here last week. I had 20 of them in for afternoon tea, and I just said to them, I wish I was 20 years younger because this stuff should have started 20 years ago. Yeah. I just wish I could have a 20-year ride on some of this stuff because these are amazing times. If you're thinking about a career in construction these days, it has never been more exciting than it is now.
And also too, I think in line with the theme of embracing change, getting on the bandwagon, adapt or be left behind, really.
Totally. If you want to live under a rock and you say some of these young people didn't work out that I was coming to visit their site even with a week's notice, I've said to them, guys, do you live under a rock? This is not the time to live under a rock. This is the time to be inquisitive. This is the time to be excited and get out and find about everything you can possibly know. I mean, most of the transactions in this industry will be done on blockchain within 5 years. Yeah,
that's right.
Totally. So, great time.
What about I think it would be unfair if I didn't ask this question. What about a positive story where someone has resisted your presence or your visit or something like that, and then a few weeks later they've actually realised the benefit of your visit or the change that happened? Or like, have you had something like that where you've actually, someone's come, hasn't been too proud and they've approached you or sent you an email or something later on to say, Chief, I'm sorry, I'm glad you dropped in, it helped make things better for us?
Well, my style, first of all, is to not go in with guns blazing. I mean, what I try to do is to do an assessment of where you're up to, what are your skill sets, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and try and share with people what it would look like if they did their job differently to the way they did it today. So I try to the extent possible to mentor as my first move, and I try to avoid causing the level of stress I can, because so a good example would be a certifier who was a marginal certifier, and he'd been responsible for a few bad jobs when I first came in, and I quickly became aware of him, and let's call him Bob. But and I said, Bob, what you've done is shocking, mate, and you've really got to pay the price for this. And so he gave me a bit of lip to start with, and sort of said, oh yeah, it's all right for you, mate, I've got to live, and all these developers are tough guys, and I've got to roll with the punches, and frankly, mate, good luck with what you're trying to do, because I'm just going to carry on. Now, I did stamp very heavily on that guy the second or third time that I ran into Bob, and I said to him, mate, if you think nothing's changing, pal, put your seatbelt on, because you're in for a ride.
That's right.
So I really gave him courage. And I could see the third time I experienced with him, I looked back as I was just walking back to my car, and I could see him standing there with his shoulders slumped, and he looked as though he had the black dog on his shoulder. And I thought, geez, you've really got to be careful, because, I do put the fear in some people, and that would be an awful outcome if that person was so distressed by that experience. So I walked back to him and I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, mate, I'm here to get the job done right, but I'm not here to do it at your expense. So why don't we have a cup of coffee together and let's talk about what this might look like forward. So we did, and I check in with this guy every couple of months. I ring him and I say, Bob, how you going, mate? And during last year, he turned around his business model. He employed half a dozen certifiers, and he kept ringing me, and he said, Dave, he said, I've flicked all the lousy developers. He said, I've just gone and told them, nah, my life doesn't include carrying you around, and I'm not carrying your cross anymore. So he flicked half of his clients, and then made it clear that he was only going to take on decent clients from now on. And I said, oh, that's fascinating. Good luck with that. And he said, no. He said, the fact that the industry's changing and the developers are getting the message. He said, so suddenly there's an appetite for me to actually do my job properly. He said, so I'm getting my mojo back. And he rang me just before Christmas, and I said, well, so how's this year gone? And he said, well, mate, he said, I've halved the number of jobs that I used to take on at virtually no margin at all. Halved the number of jobs. I've got rid of all of the crap developers that I used to work with. And he said, so I've got a bunch of good developers who want me to do my job properly and are prepared to pay me. He said, and do you know, I've now got enough time back. He said, I've got a young family. He said, I'm spending time with my family. He said, I'm having an absolutely happy life, instead of walking around thinking, oh, I've got to run over here and tick the box for that bag of whatever and tick over there for that one. So there's a really good example of the sorts of changes that are happening out there right now. I've got a company that the first time I went on their job about a year ago, it was a disgrace, and I gave them a moderately hard time, and their management soaked it up, and they said, we'd like to do a better job than we're doing, and we really think we ought to really start focusing on that, and they have. But when you get on my naughty books, you see me, you see me more often, and so I've just done the 4th visit to this company's projects, and they meet you at the gate, and they've got smiles all over their face, and they say, gee, we hope you're going to like this one better than the first one and the last one and whatever. So I've got to tell you that this company really is showing an absolute, they've turned the boat around, and you know when a company's changing its culture, not just simply what it's trying to blow smoke up your tyres or whatever. I know when a developer's trying to pull wool over my eyes, when they're trying to hide the things that they're not right on their jobs. This last inspection I did with this builder, they said, Commissioner, I'd like to take you down and show you a few things we stuffed up while we were doing the basement down here, and we want to show you how we're fixing it, and the fact that we've now got an engineer coming in and making sure that the rectification's been properly designed, because we don't want to leave anything like that behind us anymore. So they took me around and showed me every one of their stuff ups and what they were doing about it. Now I reckon that's when the compass has changed, right? When people are really coming out and saying, we're not perfect yet and we're making some mistakes, but we're going to show you the mistakes that we're making and we're going to show you what we're doing about it. That's transformation.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
All right, well, Chief, it's been really nice to have you on the show. I can't thank you enough for your time, and you know, I encourage everyone to go online. LinkedIn is where Commissioner Chandler is most active on at the moment.
And it's not a complaints desk, so please, I get about 10 messages on my LinkedIn every day saying, Commissioner, my tap's leaking or whatever. I'm not a fire engine that runs around and chases fires, so you need to go out through fair trading and make a proper representation through the organisation. So hopefully the LinkedIn presence is helpful, but I'm not a hot desk, okay?
All right, well, Commissioner Chandler, I really appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your story and coming on to Build Hatch.
Been my privilege, thank you.
Thank you for that. How's that, Ed?